Welcome to Global Perspectives 2024, the gathering of civil society organizations around the world who are interested in information exchange, in inspiration, and in the opportunities for collaboration. My name is Wolfgang Jamann. I'm the Executive Director of the International Civil Society Center. We are the convener of this conference of civil society leaders, activists, and partners. Our theme this year is truth, trust, and technology, three dimensions that are not just deeply interwoven, but increasingly impact our professional lives. Trust is the much needed glue that holds our societies together, and it's increasingly undermined by mis- and disinformation, one of the global trends that has been ranked highest as a risk by the World Economic Forum this year. Technology can accelerate such a trend, but it might also hold opportunities for us as we work collaboratively for a better future to overcome injustice and inequality. We invite you to enjoy the day with us, and we will start with a keynote address by the Administrator of the United Nations Development Programme, Mr. Achim Steiner.
Ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, I would like to thank the International Civil Society Center for inviting me to share some reflections as part of this year's Global Perspectives Conference. The use of words to deceive, confuse, and provoke are not new. What is new is the sheer speed and intensity with which information, both true and false, now spreads across our digital landscape. That includes generative AI that is making it harder to distinguish the fake from the real, also decreasing trust in the information we receive. Or consider algorithms that maximize engagement, sometimes at the expense of the truth. Imagining better shared futures and collaborating to achieve them is far harder if we can't establish a shared baseline of truth. In parallel, civil society, the backbone of democracy, human rights, and accountability, is facing mounting attacks that hinder its vital work. So, in a world of splintering truth and diminishing trust, how can civil society, and by extension our global family, cooperate towards a sustainable and more just future for all? Part of the answer lies in extraordinary technology, from AI to biotechnology, but only if we can ensure its responsible use and put it in the hands of those who need it most. The new Global Digital Compact, adopted at the UN General Assembly this year, underlines the central role of civil society to advance digital futures for all. As part of this effort, the United Nations is working to advance inclusive, open, safe, secure, and trustworthy emerging technologies to accelerate progress across the global goals. For example, consider the United Nations Development Programme's iVerify and eMonitor Plus tools. These AI-enhanced fact-checking and monitoring tools have been deployed in over 25 countries, supporting our partners, including civil society organizations, to mitigate the spread of false narratives and address hate speech. This challenge also requires a human-centered response. This is the thinking behind UNDP's Red Publica platform, which provides tools to empower young people to engage meaningfully in elections and public policy, ultimately fostering a more active civic community. Yet technology could widen the digital divide if developing countries don't first get investments in energy access, digital public infrastructure, and the corresponding skills. To ensure their benefits are shared fairly across geographies and generations, multilateral cooperation and responsible governance are also essential. That includes new ways to share the very best solutions in key areas like clean energy or the restoration of our natural world as global public goods. Indeed, the Pact for the Future clearly articulates that we must renew trust in global institutions by making them more representative of today's world. This encompasses efforts to involve civil society in advancing long-term thinking and new ideas on how to safeguard the rights and interests of future generations. Moreover, at the national level, citizen assemblies represent another way to facilitate a more deliberative processing of information, to counter the growing danger of people becoming trapped in beliefs that have often no basis in fact. There are other shifts at the community level. For instance, consider UNDP's Climate Promise Initiative, which is at the moment supporting over 125 countries to enhance their climate pledges in time for the Conference of the Parties in Brazil next year. A key part of this process is national climate change dialogues that involve civil society, indigenous peoples, and women's organizations, as well as representatives from the business sector. This approach is fostering ownership, cooperation, and trust, a proven formula to help drive the decisive climate action that our world needs. Ladies and gentlemen, polarization and distrust have been on a collision course with an ailing planet. Yet in the Pact for the Future, there has been a vote of confidence in our multilateral system as a platform to work together, and a recognition that it remains an extraordinary means by which to build trust, cooperate despite our differences, and de-risk our common future. The Pact also empowers the United Nations and civil society to seize upon this world of immense possibilities, driven by extraordinary technology like AI, groundbreaking financial mechanisms, and human ingenuity. Ultimately, it is about investing in systems where trust in each other and in the technology we use and create can change lives today and allow future generations to cross into the world they aspire to create. Thank you for this invitation and opportunity to address you today.
Our first high-level panel will explore how civil society is affected by the divisive and also the inclusive trends in our societies. And what responsibilities and opportunities do we see for the sector that is increasingly at a crossroads? Today, we will welcome Maxman, who is the president of Oxfam America, Lance Pierce, who is the CEO of NetHope, and Astha Kapoor, who is the co-founder and director of the Aapti Institute in India. They will help us explore the questions, and I'm passing on straight to Abby. Abby, you and Oxfam, you work, of course, for equality and for a juster society. And because you're the president of Oxfam America, you are witnessing an accelerated polarization very closely. How is our work, how is the work of Oxfam and our civil society affected by this, and what do you think needs to change?
Well, thanks, Wolfgang. It's great to be with you all today. And as you say, and the purpose of this panel shows that really civil society organizations, and ours included, have been really subject to digital attacks. These issues of trust are really being undermined. And sometimes the purpose of these attacks on organizations like ours might be nominally financial, meaning obtaining ransoms by holding hostage our systems and data. We have not been immune to this as Oxfam, and I suspect many of us are experiencing the same thing. But also, this underlying intention is the erosion of trust. When there's a data leak, our donors, our supporters, are they going to trust us? When our sites are hacked, and we pride ourselves in giving evidence-based information to people. And if there's a hack, who's going to trust us and trust what they're seeing and reading about our work? And really, above all, our partners and community participants who we work with and ally with in our journey on fighting poverty and inequality, they also will feel this sense of distrust and attack. And who pays the price when our institutions falter under these assaults? So we've been tracking issues of a range of things ourselves, of how this has been affecting us. Over moderation of our social media accounts is also a different form of ways that we're experiencing attacks on the platforms ourselves, suspension of our official accounts without valid cause, and in one case, some of our employees' personal accounts have been targeted on certain online platforms, most recently around the start of the conflict in Gaza. And when I had the privilege of speaking on the NetHope Global Summit with Lance recently on the topic of digital protection and digital rights, one of the speakers just before me from Microsoft had facts and figures to share with the NetHope community about the extent to which our sector is under attack. And Wolfgang, he said, Microsoft is currently tracking 600 million identity attacks every day, and think tanks and NGOs are fourth on the list of those most affected and attacked. And so this undermining of trust in our institutions is really a key objective if you profoundly disagree with the work we're doing to address root causes of poverty and inequality. And we know that's happening in the political sphere and in the sphere on the issues we care about. And I really look forward to talking about some of the ways we are working to address these in Oxfam and in the sector.
Yeah, that's scary. I mean, and do you actually see the impact? Do you see a waning trust in organizations like Oxfam? Maybe increased questioning or legitimacy, or are people turning towards NGOs because we might be a force still to trust in and to reckon with?
I'm a very optimistic and hopeful person. I hope the latter. I hope critical thinkers who really want to interrogate the validity of the information that they're hearing and receiving are staying with us. We're feeling that they are. But at the same time, we know there's so much risk, there's so much noise, there's so much volume out there that's confusing to people. So I'm hoping that with thoughtful policies, thoughtful regulation and rights respecting digital ecosystem for all really can help people feel safe in this space. And, we're really working on that. We've launched a digital rights baseline assessment tool to support our countries and our partnerships as we all collectively pivot to intentionally accounting for both digital opportunities and digital threats in the context we work in. We're working to mainstream digital rights across our programs, have some really incredible ones. A flagship example is something called the Recentering the Civic Internet Through Partner Engagement recipe that's supported by the European Union that seeks to amplify the voices of our partners and the experiences of their communities in places where internet governance decisions are made. And we're developing a private sector strategy for rights in a digital age that's largely informed by a recent paper we published that identifies the human rights risks that are posed in the tech sector through business practices and corporate behaviors. And we're looking at other ways of mapping systems around digital rights so that we can be showing supporters what's going on and hopefully seek ways to address these.
Well, that's encouraging and that's exciting to hear. Now, Oxfam is a relatively resource-rich organization. Astha, turning to you, obviously you have a good view of political developments in the global south, not just India, and you have deep insights into digital developments, especially now artificial intelligence that has come to the table with quite some force. Now, the pressure that NGOs are under, and you've heard what Abby has been talking about, but if you also look into your own political environment in India, is this just a taste of what is to come for the sector and the acceleration through digital? How do you see this?
Thanks, Wolfgang, for that question. It's always liberating to be able to talk about these in public forums because we spend so much time talking about it privately. So yeah, I think that this is a very global phenomena, and a lot of us around the world, particularly in the global south, have been experiencing both in terms of what Abby described as a discrediting of the work that we do that is happening through misinformation and also greater vulnerability of the work that we do. So whether it's through a huge amount of, like, I mean, for instance, for us recently, a bunch of emails went out to our partners in our names, but we have not sent them. So there's an increased vulnerability. And also at the same time, none of us, including my organization, which works on digital rights issues, is equipped to deal with all of this. So, the harms are stacking up much quicker than our ability to navigate it. And these harms are happening at different levels. They're happening at the institutional level in these ways, which is that a greater vulnerability to our data, a discrediting of our reputation, for instance, and also happening at the level of civil society organizations as a sector. So there's a general, on one part, stifling, but also another part, self-censorship that we all exercise, both because there's concerns from the state, but also enormous concerns from other actors as well. What's also interesting is that the work that we do is around trying to understand what are the breakdowns in terms of people's ability to access and negotiate technology, to create knowledge, and to ensure that that knowledge translates into different kinds of action, whether it's through policy or whether it's through embedding, ideas in the building of technology or in communities themselves. What we've noticed, and I think that this is the experience of a lot of us around the room, is that there is almost no funding for this kind of knowledge creation work. And when the funding comes, it often comes from resources such as big tech companies that we are actually supposed to be critiquing. So a lot of us are in this conundrum in terms of how do we do our jobs well enough when resources are limited and often represent an odd sort of mix of resources. That also leads us to a strange place where we're not able to build solidarities across because there are no cross-border big programs to bring organizations together. We, along with two of our collaborators, Data Privacy Brazil and Brazil and the Paradigm Initiative, which is an Africa-based digital rights organization, and us, we've been trying to create a Global South Alliance for digital rights because so many ways in which all of us are vulnerable to technologies is the same. And this is actually for us a really important moment to come together, to create those shared narratives, to build those solidarities. But obviously it's quite hard because, if Uber drivers are protesting in Brazil, that's the same issues for which they're protesting in India. And our role as civil society organizations is to create those bridges, is to make sure that we're able to negotiate in new and interesting international ways, because the hegemony of the big corporate is very different from the hegemony of different states. And that reframing is important, I find, but one that we all have to be quite mindful of. And I know that the question is obviously around harms, but I also see an enormous opportunity for us to come together, because I think that that's the way to deal with some of the harms. Otherwise, if we're fragmented in the ecosystem, it's going to be very hard for all of us. So, we try to do a lot of raising money together, building solidarities. You mentioned the Global Digital Compact before we started talking. We sent comments to the Global Digital Compact as the Global South Alliance, because we feel like that representation is critical. But I also wanted to echo a lot of what Abby was saying, is that this is obviously some of the worst time to do the work that we're doing. So yeah.
Thanks a lot, Astha. And of course, very encouraging also to hear about the Southern Network that you're talking about. Of course, it doesn't get enough voice. It doesn't get enough resources. There's probably something we can help with in terms of creating the publicity. When we open the website of the Aapti Institute, there's two messages that come up. The first one is actually the warning against the phishing attack that you've just mentioned. The second one is part of your mission is help people to negotiate with digital. I find this an excellent expression. You've just mentioned it yourself. Now, what are the opportunities that come with it, particularly when we talk about grassroots, about communities helping to negotiate technology rather than being on the defensive? What can they do with it?
Thank you so much for catching on both those important messages from our website. But I think that for us, we know that the way technology is designed is that it is designed to be at the individual level, and that is almost, I mean, it's purposeful, right? Individual devices, laptops, they're all atomizing our digital experience. And so when it comes to claiming rights, and digital rights are all already so high level that it's very hard to claim these at the individual level. Also, the way that value is derived from our data is done at aggregated relational levels. So the work that we've been trying to do in terms of negotiation is actually to build those grassroots organizations, not from afresh, but using existing community-based organizations, self-help groups, cooperatives, where people are collectively making decisions and are used to governing in a shared way. How can we add that layer of digital questions to that? One of my favorite examples is that of cooperatives. Cooperatives already pool labor and capital together. Why can't we have cooperatives pool data? We've seen this happen in the context of health data, in some examples, as I had originally mentioned also, of drivers, app drivers. People are starting to create more collective mechanisms that allows greater transparency, that allows pushback where it's necessary, and also accountability, whether it's to the state or to, private sector companies. That's how our theory of change is, that the only way to negotiate with technology is through bottom-up collective action. This sounds obviously very fanciful, and it is in very many ways, because organizing and mobilizing people is hard work, but that's the only way we're going to do this. And we've seen this in the writer's strike in Hollywood. They got things done. And a lot of that protest was against the use of algorithms in their work. So I think that there are examples for us to look into and learn from.
Wonderful. Turning over to Lance, and I know that a lot that Astha has said resonates with you, because NetHope, the organization that you're leading, and that huge network of NGOs who are seeking to understand the impact and the opportunities of digital, is of course also concerned about building the capacity and helping grassroots and communities. What are your major concerns, and what is, from your end, needed to turn the tide of the development that is so concerning to all of us?
No, thank you, Wolfgang, and thanks to Abby and to Astha for really excellent comments. I think there's a lot to build on there. I think from our point of view, when we look across the big international civil society organizations around the world, and then as we see down into the local implementing partner networks and the way in which so much of this work gets delivered around the world, it used to be there was sort of a, maybe not fixed, but at least a kind of a reliable institutional framework in which all of that fit. And now that institutional framework seems to be under attack from multiple sides. And it's not necessarily under attack to dismantle it completely, but it is under attack to disable it and create disruption, because that creates opportunity for crime. It erodes the rule of law. It creates uncertainty. It allows for mistrust in institutions. And as a result of that, then you find the institutions themselves reacting. So, for example, in the case of elections around the world, we see it's increasingly common for governments to just turn the internet off in the face of an election, because there's discomfort about the fact that an election may be close, or that information may be spread in some way. And so all of our organizations are really operating in this information environment these increasing attempts to sort of destabilize institutional frameworks and rule of law and so on. And I think really what Astha said is so spot on, in the sense that one of the ways that we've seen over the years, and I think this has been corroborated by a lot of the research, is that one of the most effective ways you can deal with things like misinformation and disinformation is to respond via trusted messengers. And how are messengers trusted? Well, they're trusted and seen and visible in the community. If you find yourself in a situation where your marketing campaign is doing battle against someone else's marketing campaign, you're already down a slippery slope that, in fact, reinforces a lot of the ambient mistrust that's sort of out there. And so when you can work with local organizations, local collectives, trusted messengers, people that really see and understand these things, you find these frameworks that you can begin to lever up and to build more trusted messaging for many of these things. And so many of the organizations, Oxfam is a longtime member of NetHope and certainly of ICSC, and so what we see in working with some of the larger international organizations, there's a great interest in trying to strengthen those local networks, strengthen those local channels of communication, do this in partnership. And find ways, because digital is distributed everywhere now. It seems trite to say it, but it really is. It's everywhere. It's not. It's no longer in a back room meted out by the high priests of IT who decide who gets access. Right. It's embedded in every job. It's embedded in every form of connectivity, and it's democratically accessible in many places in the world. Certainly not all. And so that means then that there's this opportunity for great mobilization, I think, and empowerment, and at the same time, the fragmentation that was discussed is also very real. So finding ways to reinforce those trusted messages, reinforce those trusted messengers, reinforce the work of organizations in these countries that are actually doing that are the point of service. They are the caregivers. They are the people providing that last mile or last kilometer of delivery. And those are organizations that the big international groups depend on, and that are vital and embedded in the fabric of local economies and local societies. So I think the trends towards much of this disruption and much of the misinformation that we see are going to continue. Abby mentioned the really kind of shocking statistics from Microsoft, and those are getting worse every year because the tools to execute those attacks are getting cheaper. More and more of them are available on marketplaces where consumers can increasingly buy them. And so as these types of disruptions continue, this parallel effort to really work with people who have a stake in what's happening in communities, the organizations that are providing those services that are pillars of the community and where those trusted networks are, really investing in that is important. And what's, I think, optimistic about that from my point of view is that that's been the work of civil society all along. So that is the great strength of the sector, is that we have, well before the internet, spent time really the really effective organizations, the really highly regarded organizations are the ones that have always tried to work in a way that was sensitive, was understanding, collaboratively in a partnership fashion. And that's just part of the DNA of the sector. And I think we need to make sure that in the interests of that we avoid the attempts to pursue the shiny and the new for the sake of the shiny and the new, and remember that we have a lot of innate strength in the way that we've always worked as a sector. Because it's about that human-to-human contact. It's humans using technology intentionally and thoughtfully, because if we don't do that, then we'll be used by the technology and we'll start to slide into some of these problems that get worse and worse. So just a couple of thoughts from our corner here, Wolfgang.
Thanks a lot, Lance. I have to ask this. Do you want to say something about the ambivalent relationship of what Astha called the hegemony of corporate sector? I mean, you work closely with the Microsofts of this world. They're allies, but they're not only that. How do you see this?
I think these are very real challenges. We do work closely with the tech sector, and we're in part because every organization, as Astha said, is really dependent upon the large platforms. Then there's been certainly a lot of discussion about the use of open source, and so there are some advocates of going completely open source and doing that. And there's been interesting experiments with that. But I mean, the large tech companies are part of this landscape and part of this fabric, and they will. Oxfam's a good example, I think, of an organization that has, found that there are times when you're sitting on the opposite side of the table of some of these institutions, and sometimes you're sitting on the same side of the table, depending upon the issue, right? And so there are no universal friends, there are no universal enemies, but there are interests that we do share, and as long as we are true to our principles about what we stand for and the people that we want to serve, then that will give us the ability to work with companies in ways that our interests align. And in the case of organizations that do campaign, NetHope does not do that, although many of our members do, and that's by design. We were always intended to be a bit of a digital Switzerland, so to speak, where organizations that in fact have very different ways of working could come together and collaborate on the use of digital. And so, I think we definitely see those tensions, and I think, but you have to stay true to your principles. And find the ways you can work together. And if there are times when you can't, then for those organizations that do sit opposite the table and negotiate and execute those tactics, then those are in our membership as well, and we hope to see from what they're doing and learn from them along the way.
Thanks a lot, Lance. A lot of hope, a lot of positive message, and also seemingly a lot of alignment. Now, our sector is not quite as aligned as we all know. There's discussions about decolonization, about power shift from north to south. There might be a couple of things that we've heard from each other where we want to reflect briefly on. So I want to invite you for a second round of reflections. Astha, asking you what resonates you after you have listened to your colleagues, and what are maybe challenges that you have for us?
No, thank you so much. Super interesting. And just to pick at what Lance was saying is that there are no universal friends. And I think that civil society organizations have to take the shape-shifting role now, and because it is true that it's about the principles. We have this rule at Aapti, which is that we will advocate positions that we hold in private publicly, and that's literally the only filter that we can offer in that sense, which is that in some instances you agree with governments, and in other instances technology companies come as an offer. So for instance, encryption is a really good example of that, where many governments are pushing for backdoors to encrypted technologies, and there are private sector organizations. I mean, Signal is a really good example of that, which is obviously a nonprofit, but which is really, very, very strong on encryption. Even WhatsApp, for all its sins, is an encrypted platform. So I think that it's an interesting time for all of us to navigate and take this principle first approach. I think the civil society organizations that we all represent, as Lance said, have been just doing this for a long time. We believe in a certain internationalism, a certain collaboration, and also creating space for these shared ideas. I think that we do need to do that much more, and also to make sure that in these ways where there's opportunities for global governance, we start to crack that door open much more. I know that the GDC was critiqued for doing a lot of consultations, but then negotiations left all of us out of it. So how do we make sure that we are engaging, even if not in track one conversations on policy stuff, but definitely, through other mechanisms. And I think also what is also incumbent and maybe on civil society organizations is also to create new and different kinds of models with communities. I think that that's something that we those are always time consuming to do, but creating, whether in our work, what we've been trying to do is creating bottom-up stewardship models where communities get involved, or having community-led content moderation, which has worked in some bits and bobs but can't be scaled. But I think both creating these mechanisms through the civil society framework, but also then exhibiting them, showcasing them, and demonstrating that there are indeed alternatives that are much more community forward versus relying on either big state or big tech, I think is something for our sector to consider much more deeply.
Thanks, Astha. And back to Lance. What are the key insights that you get when you're having these discussions with NGO representatives, not just from Washington or Boston or India, but all over the world? You get these inputs. Are we hitting the sweet spots? Are we doing the right thing? Or where do we need to still change and alter?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And and I think just also so less people think I was being overly cynical in my comment earlier about no friends, no enemies, only interests. That's a commonly stated saying in U.S. politics, particularly in congressional politics. It's a bit of an adage here. So, but it does have some utility in the sense that it does force you to sort of focus on really what's important and what you're trying to do. And I think, as I just reflect on, if you're big and you're well-resourced, you can often retreat into institutionalism in a way. But civil society has often not been big and often not been well-resourced relative to some of the other institutions. And we've always been good at finding the humans in the machine, so to speak, right? So because the big companies are not always monolithic. And in truth, the governments are not always monolithic, even though they may have a dominant way of working or extend a certain hegemonic influence in some ways. And so civil society has been good about finding the humans with whom we can work, in part because we've just not been as well resourced, because we are committed to serving humans, and we have not always had the tools of institutionalism available to us in the way that, say, government and business have. And so, I think, and there's an enormous amount of creativity in civil society around the use of technology to try to better deliver missions. And that's not just in the operational efficiency sense, although there's a lot of that going on. But it really is trying to find ways to help these tools and the data that's collected to be used responsibly and effectively. And I think there's a real revolution going on there, which is again, lest we could get very lost in the current dysfunctional state of the world and the declining trust and the reasons to despair. And I don't want to discount those because those can be real, but I think there's an enormous amount of goodwill and effort going in by people everywhere around the world to really figure out how do we take these technologies and really use them to help strengthen communities? How do we use them to help people really achieve their full potential? That original optimism around the internet, which has been dimmed somewhat by so much of the dysfunction and the negative trends that we see. But you can hold that optimism in a good place, and you can recognize that two things can be true at the same time. That these downside potentials are real. We have to be aware of them. Unintended consequences occur. And yet at the same time, these technologies do hold the potential for people to do amazing things. And how do we create more of that space so that people can do that? And I think the groups you've got on this call here are really all aligned in that sense, at least based on what I'm hearing. And there's exciting work going on everywhere if we choose to be aware of it.
Wonderful. So Abby, you've been patient. I'm sure you have a lot to react to and a lot to reflect on. But I'm also asking you to speak from your wealth of experience. I mean, you are not just the president of Oxfam US who's invited to the UN General Assembly and the big guys, and we've just heard the UNDP Administrator talk about the Global Digital Compact, but you've also worked in the field in East Africa and in South Asia. So which perspectives give you most hope, and where should we focus on? And please help us navigate this complex field a bit from your experience.
Well, thanks. And again, I find just being in these conversations are the place of hope and solidarity and collaboration and cooperation in organizations like Aapti Institute, NetHope, and International Civil Society Center that convene or meta membership organizations that help us come together. And I think, if anything, that I'm sure we've all learned is it's the strength of our internal and external cooperation and collaboration that really helps us be strong, whether it's on the offense of moving forward the things we believe in, or on the defense when it feels like we're under attack. And I think, to Lance, I love your point of holding both of the two things at the same time. We can feel all of those things happening around us. So I'd like to talk about just a finger on two different points. One, big tech that has come up earlier, and maybe try to look at a more hopeful way we're all grappling with the problem and their own accountability as duty bearers. And we know that the UN's BTech project and the UN guiding principles on business and human rights require that all tech companies respect the rights of their users and people at large, with respect to products, development, deployment, and use. And, really, we have to keep making clear, be it us as, organizations like ours that do campaign and hold companies accountable, but all of us together, of what do we do to reinforce and reaffirm with our supporters and those who care that companies are duty bound to do more to ensure their respective human rights, even in the absence of an international or national legally binding enforcement and mechanisms. And we do see right now the risk of, the corporate and political capture that some of these big tech or big billionaires have on society. And I think it's all of us, it's civil society that has a huge role to play there, and keeping up the fight for what's right and against what is wrong. So, that's sort of a Sisyphean effort, it can feel like, that, we're constantly pushing that boulder uphill, but we have to keep at it. And then I'll pivot a little bit back to the cooperation and collaboration of civil society and what we can do. And to your points, I think both Astha, Lance, and Wolfgang, you've all mentioned that, we do have experience as civil society. We really do. We're not Luddites. There are human-centered, onward-leading opportunities of how we mitigate threats and promote opportunities, and the work and coalitions that we have advancing toward shared objectives that are principles and values-based and values-driven. So I was really moved by your point about that modeling behaviors. You said it more eloquently than this, but with, all you do internally with externally, and we strive to do the same thing, but we falter sometimes. But we also need to recognize in this space that the pace of change in digital, and Lance, you've already said, and we all do, digital is everywhere, it's everything, it's ubiquitous, it's part of our lives. But the pace of change is really what's been different. The supercharge, what's happened in the past 30 years has been extraordinary. I think many of us, 20, 30 years ago, couldn't have even imagined where we are today, though some smarter people than me might have. But there's a real urgency for us to address that speed issue. And one is, the rapid changes in the capabilities of AI. If social media sought to commodify and monetize our attention, which I think we know it does, it seems that AI could really seek to commodify and monetize our trust and intimacy through masquerading as humans, which is both scary but something to really reckon with. And the second is the rapid pace of adoption. And the internet today is so far from the ones we knew when we took our steps into the new era decades ago. And it would really abrogate our collective commitment to a hopeful future for everybody if we sought to welcome what we know will be 2 billion more people online without strong binding commitments to trust enhancing safety and security, because we know trust is a foundation in human society. It's been essential for the society, the survival of humanity. and the systematic erosion of trust, whether it's intentional or unintentional, for profit or political gains, and to the sole benefit of the powerful and wealthy, as we see, it's not something we can let happen, or at least not on our watch. And we really can realize the benefits and protect our people and societies simultaneously. These are not mutually exclusive, but we have to prioritize accountability, cooperation, goodwill, and above all, trust.
Thank you very much, Abby. So we want to dare to look into the future for a minute or so with the last round. I'm going to ask you a question about that future. I mean, the topic of the conference is truth, trust, and technology. It's not just good alliterations, but I think it's also three dimensions that really are relevant for our professional lives and the societies we live and work in. And I'm just wondering, let me start with you, Lance. Could you identify or could you tell us what is your preferable future around these three dimensions and how do we get there?
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts on that. Again, I think it builds on a lot of the themes that we've heard. I was looking recently at the current Edelman Global Trust Barometer, which is often a good indicator of sort of where trust is going in society as a whole and trust of institutions. And what was interesting about some of the most recent information there is that there's been a parallel. As societies have become more polarized, there's been a parallel thing that's been happening with trust in institutions and trust in innovation, which innovation has supposedly been the lifeblood of so much of our technological revolution over the years. Is that well, presumably there's more innovation, therefore more benefit, and so on. And so as mistrust in information in institutions has risen, mistrust in innovation has risen, and mistrust in institutions' ability to manage information for human benefit. And so, I think one point I would leave there is that, well, the tech companies have a material stake. The tech sector has a material stake in that. It's not just information technology, it's vaccines, it's medical technology. There's a whole halo effect around that mistrust in information married to a mistrust in institutions. There's the one, I think, the antidote to some of that, and this is not a silver bullet, as they say, but it's really getting back to that idea that institutions really need to serve people and not the other way around, and that we have to make sure that we've got the equation right for technology, that it's technology as a tool for people to use for their own purposes, rather than having technology, set up determinative paths that take away their choice or that take away their ability to self-determine what they want to do. Because the more we go down that path, the more we will find ourselves in a situation where there will just be less trust, because people will see that their decisions are predetermined for them, and they won't have agency in that sense. So. One of the big jobs of civil society has always been to reaffirm, individual dignity, human dignity, the integrity of communities, and agency in being able to make your own choices. And if we don't, we, and I mean all of us, and that includes the many who are not on this call, don't make sure that we're getting that equation right and putting people using technology for their purposes at the center, as opposed to people simply having their choices taken away by technology and innovation, we can expect to see a continuation of this. Now, the good news is that I think people are waking up to this. We're seeing a repeat in some ways of the mistakes that were made not only with social media, but also with the internet itself, right? In the way that AI is starting to be rolled out. And I think that finding our ways to have civil society in particular be a voice for people at the center of the equation and responsible use of technology is going to be a critical role for all of us, and I'm guessing so many people in your audience as well. And so that's not a small challenge. And there are definitely reasons to have your eyes wide open and concerned. But you were talking, Wolfgang, about dare we look into the future? And the past is gone, and there's only right now, and what we do right now creates the future. So I think we just have to really stand in that with some confidence and some humility, and a little bit of grace towards others. And I think if we do that, we'll start to make some differences with some of these bigger trends.
Thank you, Lance. Over to Abby. I mean, your colleagues at Oxfam, you all maintain an incredible optimism despite the difficult circumstances that you're in and that you're dealing with, both professionally and, of course, in the societies that you live. Is that optimism reaching into the probable future that you're seeing, particularly around those dimensions that we've just mentioned?
Oh, I it's going to sound ironic. I hope so. I believe so. I think that when we look at, intergenerational engagement, when we talk about, who this technology, trust, and truth, as I love the alliteration, we have to be hopeful. We have to remain hopeful. And I think we see the activism and dynamism of different generations, young generations, those who've grown up with technology in ways that some of us haven't, is they have expectations about rights and accountability, and how we help reinforce that is fundamental. And we give safe, non-exploitative ways of engaging and using and protecting and talking about what good governance and the rule of law means, and that is in the digital space. We see that all around us. So the focus on, trust being such a cornerstone, but we also know that technology, is something that can advance human progress and enhance trust. Those two do not have to be exploited, but only if it's governed in a manner that protects us from misaligned incentives of, this extractive profit making and the abdication of societal externalities and forces. So when civil society is under attack, including ourselves, that's in ways to undermine that. And these are, the fights of our times, I believe. And, Lance, you mentioned innovation, and, that's very interesting because we've seen big tech, not want regulations or governance and that's used because it would somehow disincentivize innovation. I do not believe, and we at Oxfam do not believe that is true. They are not mutually exclusive. You need to have thoughtful governance in a way that protects people and societies in the whole, not just a privileged few. So I think this notion of partnership and cooperation that we just need to reinforce for today, allyship, how we work together in movements is really the wave of the future. It's the wave of the present and the future, how people use their voice and agency to stand for as what's right and the future we all believe in and want to see. And even though there are people who have different viewpoints and different perspectives, we think that there's real opportunity to have kind of be on the right side of what happens, and digital being such a force and potential for good. We see that as a tool, a lifeline in places where we work, from Ukraine, where we've seen technology both be exploited for good and for bad. We see it as so important for people's lives and livelihoods, and it's up to us to come together to create a more hopeful and respectful and governing frameworks, and hold everybody, those who have power especially, accountable to be duty bearers in this shared effort.
Thank you, Abby. Astha, you have the final word. So maybe you share with us your vision of a trustful, a just, and a solidaric future, and maybe also where does your vision come from? Is it through tech? Is it through the trust in the new generation? Something else? Over to you.
No, thank you so much for that. And I was nodding along very violently while Abby was talking about governance, because I don't think that, we we think about that role, and the role civil society organization can play in enforcing, enabling, enacting that pillar. I think that for me, we've been doing a lot of work on trust, but much more in the concept of digital trust. And what we've been realizing is that there's been a commodification of trust. Trust and safety when it comes to AI. There are little locks on your website. They'll tell you that, your data is safe. You can buy those digital locks. So, they're always telling you your ID is safe. Here's a digital locker. Here's all of this, right? Your information is safe. And I think that what has happened in this incredible commodification of trust is that we've lost what trust actually is, which is this multi-directional human experience. And I think that that's, to me, for a future that is truthful, that is enabled by technology. I think trust is that pillar for me, but also the rediscovery of trust as that human thing that we experience, so that it can be created between organizations and movements and people in a meaningful way, and so that we can enact on it. Because I think that some of the harms of technology are, as we started out, has been to distrust one another. It has been to distrust the information because of this enormous sense of misinformation and disinformation. It is to distrust perspectives. It is to distrust politics, and the polarization that we started this conversation with. But I think that if we were to look towards a future in which is reliant on trust, and not just from the trust and safety language that we've been hearing, but from what we know about each other, I think that to me is the pillar that we should be leaning on. And I think that as we look to the future, we need to start creating those solidarities that actually give us both the language as well as the institutional frameworks on trust. And I think that needs to happen at a much more human and personal level, and then translate into, as I said, institutions as they come. So yeah, I'll pause there.
Well, thank you very much. What a wonderful panel. Astha, Abby, and Lance, a great thanks for the inspirational, hopeful insights. I think they can lead the way, and they make me trust that we can make a difference in the sector, particularly as we talk and work together more often. This is the opening panel of our conference. It will be followed by a deeper discussion over mis and disinformation. Also, how are we addressing anti-rights actors? So there's a lot to do. Thanks for joining us. Hope that you and many of our colleagues can enjoy the rest of the day with us. Yeah, stay strong. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.